All right, welcome to the Utah Story Show. So if you joined us last week, at the end of the program, I had the announcement that Mike Lee was going to come on, and I guess I was being a little bit presumptuous because his comms director told me he would love to talk about affordable housing. We're an affordable housing podcast. We've been covering it for 8 months. I thought it wouldn't be any big deal to just get him on the phone or get him here in studio. We're still going to try to get him on, but I did not hear back from his comms director. He told me just email, set it up, tell me the details, and I never heard back from him. So hopefully that's still going to happen. We've got a really cool little 6-minute video about the developer we introduced last week who's trying to build affordable housing out in Centerfield, Utah. And the challenges he's having there with the mayor. I talked to the mayor. It's a really interesting little film that we put together. We show the homeless people on the street are a lot different demographic than what we're used to. A lot of seniors are priced out of the housing market, single-parent mothers priced out of the housing market, and now they're finding themselves living in tents. We've been interviewing those people. Going to show you some of them and recap that, and how really all they really want to have is an affordable place to live. They don't want to sit there on the street using drugs or drinking alcohol. They don't want to be out of work. They really just want affordable housing. So we're going to keep drilling down on that topic and bringing you more stories from the streets and stories of people who are dealing with that massive challenge. And really excited to have on the show today one of Utah's great storytellers, Joe Prokop from PBS Utah. Thanks for joining us, Joe.
Hey,
Joe.
Glad to be here, Rich, and happy to do it.
Yeah, so you started out at PBS almost 30 years ago. What was your first position you had there?
Well, my first position was studio camera operator on telecourses. And at that time, the distance learning thing up at the University of Utah, the model is that you'd have a professor come in and sit down and give their lecture on whatever the topic was, and we'd film it and then turn it around and put it on KULC at the time, Channel 9. Mm-hmm. And then as a student at the University of Utah, you could tune in and take notes, so you didn't have to go to the class. And then the tests were administered remotely. And so that was kind of the first distance learning model. Little did we know that the pandemic was going to come, 30 years later, and that was going to be the model, but a little bit different. And so I went from there to actually producing an economics telecourse, but the professor on that one, this guy Richard Fowles, he might still be up there. He said, you know what, just looking at me on the screen is going to be boring. Let's come up with some skits, and let's come up with some shticks, and we'll make it more interesting. And so we just got to have free reign. There was really nobody reining us in, so it was a lot of fun. That's cool. Then I kind of got the idea that, hey, I kind of like this, and then went from working for the distance learning part to
were you a student at the U at that time?
Yeah, I was a student, and then I did an internship at KUED, which is now PBS Utah, and then kind of like the story of my life, I just kind of forgot to leave.
And you originally came here on a ski trip and you never went home.
Exactly. I'm not the only one, right?
Yeah, I've heard that story a few times. Yeah, that's pretty cool. And so you got into doing stuff about land conservation, Jackson Hole story.
Yeah.
And was that your first environmental
That
story
was my first one that kind of focused on the national parks and focused on again, affordable housing. That's a big part of that story. You have two kinds of people that live in Jackson Hole proper. It's the ones that have 2 jobs and the ones that have 2 houses, right? And the ones that have a big part of that story back then even was that half the people that waited the tables and ran the lifts and made the beds all had to live over on the other side of Teton Pass in Idaho. And to get to work, some days was terrifying and harrowing because, Teton Pass is a high mountain pass.
All the way over that pass every day to get to work.
Exactly.
To wait on the rich elites in Jackson Hole. Wow.
Exactly. So another part of that story was that one had a real kind of aha story about it because I had no idea about the Rockefeller's family involvement in kind of secretly buying up all the Front Range, and then with the idea that they'd turn it over to the National Park Service. And then it turned into a big fight, whereas the county of Teton County didn't want the park being expanded. They fought tooth and nail about it. And as Grand Teton National Park eventually did get expanded, it took, 20, 30 years from the initial land purchases to when they could do it. Does that sound familiar?
Yeah, wow. And I mean, that is really the essence of the Moab story I've been telling in the magazine for the last 8 years.
Right.
You got like Castle Valley, and it's this immaculate, amazing valley full of land and space, but because the residents require 5 acres per resident, and they don't want to allow any affordable housing. They want to keep it pristine and beautiful, but then you're pricing everybody out of the market. And I guess that same thing kind of happened in Jackson, where I assume the county didn't want it to be bought off and part of they didn't want to have it part of the park because they wanted affordable housing available. Was that what it came down to? Or?
Well, no. What their beef was is that they wanted to be able to do their traditional Wyoming things, grazing cattle out on the national monument, hunting on the national monument, being able to, not have the government overreach, and also taking that land off of the tax rolls. So, you take it from the tax rolls, it's not land that is usable anymore.
The local government can't benefit from it.
They can't benefit it. And they can't, but what ended up happening is that over the years they ended up realizing that, hey, this brings lots of people into our county, and we can feed them and sell them a T-shirt and whatever, right?
Put them up in a hotel.
Yeah, put them up in a hotel.
Charge $400 for the hotel,
right? But then that puts the workers that live there back on the other side of the mountain pass, So,
So that same model is played out in Vail, in Aspen, in Telluride, in Park City, now in Moab, where you just have this service sector group of people who really can't afford to live in the town, but obviously the rich and wealthy and second and third homeowners, they need them, and so they're having to build more and more government housing, or more the new provision in Vail and Aspen, I know, is you actually, if you're going to build a new hotel, you got to build employee housing. But it seems to be that it's just like pricing the middle class out of the economy, and you just have the poor and the rich. Is that kind of what you see too?
Absolutely. Especially, I'm a skier, and I know people that over the years, they'll have to bunk up with 5-10 people in a house, share rooms in order to be able to afford to live the dream, as we like to put it. And over the years, I've seen it play out, even on this recent documentary that I did, Call the Canyon, about Zion National Park. Why would I rent my house out for $500, $1,000 a month to a worker that works in town when I can Airbnb it every night for $500?
Yeah.
And that, again, it cuts in, and it's an economic decision, obviously. So at some point, we're going to have to realize that, if you want this quality of life, if you want to attract people to come here, then the people that do the work and teach the schools and fight the fires and all that stuff are going to need to be part of that community,
Yeah. And I think that, especially in the town of Moab, you got these really cool people. I mean, they're really, I've gotten to know a lot of these tour guides and these river raft guides, and they are so hungry to be connected to the land and be connected with the river and to be part of the community there. And they're living in their cars. I mean, they're living in sometimes people's backyards in tents, so they can just be able to live this river rafting guide lifestyle. But then they realize, oh boy, I 5 years into it, there's no way I can afford to buy a house. There's no way I can afford to stay here. And then they're just sort of, launched out into the real world. And it's just kind of sad because there's no economic ladder they can really climb. They're at the bottom, and then they're foisted out into the real world, and then they're just got to figure out, well, am I going to work in an office now? What can I do?
Yeah, or how do you put that nut together to even make a down payment if you could even find something you could afford, right?
Yeah.
And we just found this, we had this happen with a coworker of mine who's, has been working for the University of Utah for over 10 years. He's a custodian, shows up to work, works hard every day, found himself in a situation where he couldn't live in the apartment that he had. The lease was up. The rent went up to the point where he couldn't afford it. Had to bridge it by living in a cheap hotel, him and his wife. And then eventually some of our coworkers managed to rally around and figure out a way to get him, out of that limbo and into a house.
Mm-hmm.
But you think about it, not everyone's going to have that.
Yeah.
Not everyone's going to have that ability to have a safety net. Let's just call it that.
Yeah. We've had the same problem here with our drivers who deliver magazines, and they do it part-time, but now they're telling me, oh, you got to move. We can't afford to live here anymore. So it's had a dramatic effect on small businesses, especially. It's just so much harder to find people because if people are just priced out of the housing market and can't afford to live here anymore, they're going to have to move to, Elko, Nevada or Evanston, Wyoming. But Troy says we got some questions up on YouTube. Do you want to tell us about those?
Yeah, I actually sent you a screenshot, but I have Candace asked, have you heard anything about affordable housing in southern Utah near Springdale? People in hospitality can't afford to live there. They are living in vehicles on public land. She wants to know if you've heard anything about it.
I did not hear about that. It doesn't surprise me. Springdale was brought up to us about a year ago. I have a friend who lives in St. George, and he wanted to put on a beer festival. Springdale is owned by very, very wealthy people, and they have a real community. But a lot of the people there have their wealth already. They don't need to have necessarily a local economy. And unfortunately, I've heard it's impossible for get them to give up their NIMBYism. Not in my backyard. You can do affordable housing, but just do it on the other side of St. George or somewhere, in St. George.
Yeah, I mean, even Hurricane or I can't remember the other name of the town. That's right at the base there.
Oh, yeah. Kanab is close to there.
Yeah. Anecdotally, while I was working on this Zion documentary, I rented, it was kind of in between COVID, when the university had travel restrictions and I couldn't really get a crew to go down there, but I needed to do some work. And I rented a big van, a sleeper van. And I was out on the flats over by Virgin, and I met people that were working, part-time at the park, part-time at the hotel, who were living out there, on the BLM land, free camping, 14 days and, move along.
Wow.
And so, I did meet some of these people firsthand. So, the problem is real. The problem, what are we going to do? I don't know. I don't have the answer. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's the thing we've been looking at, especially in terms of this this problem now being statewide, even in rural areas. We had some guests on last week from Cedar City, and they said, Cedar City, you cannot find any affordable housing. And that traditionally has been one of those more rural areas where you could find affordable housing, because they're close to the university down there. And then we found a developer who actually got approval on a plot of land. This isn't Cedar City, but the San Pete County, which was also very affordable till recently, and was going to put in manufactured homes. And these manufactured homes have the, you know,
We don't want a trailer park.
yeah,
here.
exactly. Yeah, they just have this reputation. We don't want trailer trash here.
Yeah.
But then we show the one guy who got approved before the city put the moratorium on it. This is in Centerfield. And this guy sold his 2-bedroom townhome that he and his little tiny daughter and wife could barely fit in, and got a 3-bedroom manufactured home, 2-bath, 3-bedroom. And he was so over the moon with having that thing paid off at the age of 31. And he'd taken his family to Hawaii. He went on a vacation to Zion. He's like, I feel like I can live again. I feel like I can breathe and I can enjoy my life rather than just work for a mortgage.
Yeah. And you have that, you know, another issue that plays into not just the growth issue in this state is water.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I did a documentary. It was a half-hour show called "The Utah's Uncertain Water Future." That's quite a handle. We couldn't quite come up with a good title, but anyway.
Well, it isn't quite uncertain.
We got into the to a couple of issues, and one of them was the fact that St. George is growing at this clip that is almost unsustainable.
Yeah.
You know, and back then, you know, that's when they floated the idea of the pipeline from Lake Powell to St. George.
Yeah.
You know, and that is a problem for a couple of reasons, because you're trucking water from the upper basin to a lower basin, and those kind of water transfers are, you know,
was going to be like $2 billion or something like that.
well, no, it's just the legal aspects of trying to transfer water, because, you know, the Colorado River Compact, you have the upper basin states and the lower basin states, and the lower basin, although Utah is technically an upper basin state, the Virgin River is a lower basin tributary of the Colorado. So to make that transfer, you know, how they even got as far as they still have, and it's not off the table.
Really? Even at this point?
Right?
Let's stick
And
another
so,
giant
yeah,
straw
we'll
in
just
the
stick
Colorado.
a straw in
just
there,
just
just see
totally
how low
drain
can
it
we
out.
go. You know, and that project was pitched as an energy project because, you know, you're going to generate water when the gravity puts the water down the hill, but, you know, it's a net, maybe net loss, because you got to pump it up the hill to get it to roll over the hill. But yeah, that was kind of an eye-opener for me, because we interviewed a person in Enoch who had purchased a house on speculation in a development, and because the aquifer there had pumped dry, there was subsidence, so all the sewers that they put into this proposed development, you know, now we're running the wrong way. The water is not running to the house. There was one house out there, and it was kind of a heartbreaking story for the homeowner, and a heartbreaking story just to see, you know, as we interviewed some farmers.
Wait, why did the water change direction?
So what happens is, if you pump groundwater, right, you have the hydrostatic pressure that holds basically the crust of the earth up, right, and the subsoils. When you withdraw that water, the San Fernando Valley in California is a great example of this. When you withdraw that water, now you have a void. So then the earth sinks to fill that void. So where that subdivision was laid out used to be, you know, alfalfa fields. Then the subsidence of the earth dropping made it so this house at the end of the block was now higher, you know, than it had been before.
Oh, okay.
Right? So now, instead of the house drop, the sewers now run back towards the house and not, you know, the other way.
Oh, got it.
Right?
Oh my gosh.
So
jeez.
it was, you know, and it's probably that's probably still in court. That was
And that's in Enoch, Utah?
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, this story, so the mayor said when we followed this story, and just outside of Gunnison is where Centerfield is, where Gunnison's got the new prison. It's in San Pete. the mayor says there's just not enough water, except the luxury homes all have these giant yards and tons of green grass, and they're obviously using tons and tons of water. And I said, well, what about restricting the use a little bit so you can do affordable housing? And he said, well, that's really not fair, because they already paid for their water, they should have it, they should get it. And he said that they have 500,000 gallon tanks for 2 of them for 17,000 residents. And if the water level gets too low, they can't fight fires anymore because the pressure also goes down. And I don't know anything about water, but does that sound legit?
Absolutely. I mean that's a problem closer to home in Big Cottonwood Canyon.
Yeah.
There's so many different subdivisions up there and historic cabins and whatnot, and that's a big fight. Whether you have land or you have a cabin or you have, your family's had this cabin in their family for years and years and years, and they got water rights back in the day, but then you want to build over on this lot, there's no access to water. And so again, like you think about like head pressure, so you have the mountain, the water rolls downhill. By the time you get to some of these lower places in Big Cottonwood Canyon before it drops off, the pressure of the water coming out of the ground is 250 pounds. You hook a fire truck up to that and it's going to blow all the seals, right? Mm-hmm. So there's, water.
Yeah, it's such a complicated issue.
Exactly.
It's such a big problem. Troy says we got more questions.
Yeah, so more from Candace. She mentioned that the town that you guys were probably thinking of was Laverkin.
Yes, absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, she says it's super cliquey there. It's where she lives, and there's actually 5 Airbnbs on her street. So there's that.
I believe it.
But the question she asked also was she wants to know where she can find Joe's documentaries.
Good question. We'll segue into that. I've got a clip to show on PBS Utah. So if you go to pbsutah.org, you can find Joe's page if you type in Joe Prokop. And man, the huge array and diversity of the films you've done is amazing. Like the University of Utah gymnastics team, Jackson Hole, Spirit of Fort Douglas, the Alta Experience, and then the national parks, Beyond the Crowds, Utah Bucket List, Green River, Divided Waters. But let's play a little clip now from The Call of the Canyon. This one premiered just last January, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, I'll play the beginning of that film and you can talk about it.
Seeing it, and those compelled to return, all making the pilgrimage to the canyon sculpted by water, wind, and time. When people first encounter Zion Canyon's Navajo sandstone towers, words often fail. They stand transfixed. Artists through the decades have found ways to articulate their awe, creating works that capture a moment in time and endure like echoes through canyon walls. Call of the Canyon, Zion National Park.
Yeah, so narrated by Robert Redford, Call of the Canyon, and the artists that you see in that film, who are those people?
Roland Lee, who's a watercolor artist, and he has been painting in Zion National Park for 50 years. And he teaches watercolor classes, and he just has a genuine love for the park. Kate Starling from Rockville, she's the woman that you see kind of painting out up on Kolob Terraces. And that was a great place for me to find the Kolob Terraces because you can enjoy Zion National Park without going into the main canyon. And then Hal Cannon, who's a folklorist, multi-instrumentalist.
I've heard his name a lot.
All around good guy,
Yeah.
He did just an amazing job for us. And then we also had another segment that was pre-produced where Waddy Mitchell, who's a cowboy poet, talks a bit about his relationship with Zion National Park. And so we have a section of the show where we talk about how the park came from getting on the radar back in about 1903. There was a guy named Frederick Dellenbaugh, and Frederick Dellenbaugh was with John Wesley Powell on the second expedition. He was the artist and geologist, I believe, and he came back to Zion after 30 years away and chronicled the area and painted and brought it to the attention of the folks back in Washington that, hey, this needs to be preserved, this needs to be a national park. So there you have an artist. I mean, the focus is that you have artists that have championed this place and still come back and draw inspiration from it, and it goes on to this day.
Yeah. And the way I see it, it's like when I was in my 20s, I went and explored the subway and the Narrows and got all these permits and was able to do that. And the park is, I think, pretty well regulated now. I mean, you park and then you ride a shuttle up. But obviously the huge challenge is a lot of people want to love the park, but then you have the challenge of how do you manage all the traffic, all the people who want to see everything. Have you gotten into that much, and do you know how what's the best way to navigate that balance?
I mean, unfortunately, the best way to get to see Zion National Park is to go in the winter.
Yeah, that's Moab too.
Right, just go in the winter. You'll have a great time. You won't see anyone. Uh-huh. I mean, maybe even now it's probably busier in the winter.
Yeah.
And the pandemic again. We started this project, and the pandemic hit, and there was a couple of trips where I got to go down there, and it was a ghost town,
Nice.
Which was cool for me.
Yeah.
Right. But not cool if you own the grocery store in town or the restaurant, or you were the person serving the burritos over at the Bit and Spur,
Mm-hmm.
And so I got to see it maybe in a way that people haven't been able to see it in 30 or 40 years.
Yeah.
But, in our conversations with Jeff Bradybaugh, who is the superintendent of Zion National Park, this is something that they take very, very seriously. They are monitoring the situation. They're doing what they can to, they don't want to just say, hey, go out, if the main canyon's crowded, just go out somewhere else. They want to be able to manage the areas that are where the people want to go.
Mm-hmm.
And so what was funny is that, he said, we hiked the Watchman Trail that day, and he said, oh, did you see our trail counters out there? I'm like, no, I didn't notice them. He's like, well, good. So, they will monitor how many people, just like a road,
Mm-hmm.
how many people go by this spot on a given day, and what do we need to do to make that an enjoyable experience. And they do a pretty good job there. I mean, there's work to be done, but overall they're working on it. And something that was kind of controversial that I included is that the east side of the park is now going to be developed, but developed in a more thoughtful way, with the idea that there will be worker housing, affordable housing. There's going to be a new visitor center, and it's on private land. The landowner that owns it has put a lot of his land into conservation easements to keep that feel that it's wide open spaces. And, he could have sold it to the highest bidder, and it could look like Virgin, where they put up those under canvas. Have you seen this development?
Oh, yeah. Man, those are exploding.
Glamping,
Yeah,
glamping covered wagons and all that kind of
Moab
thing.
too, and everywhere.
Yeah. And so, he could have done that. He could have sold it to somebody that wanted to build a big old house or a subdivision or whatever. But he's working with the park and working with Design Forever Project to do kind of a thoughtful eastern gateway to the park.
Oh, that's cool.
So naturally we all want it to be the way it is, with nothing happening, but there's that balance, and at least they're they're thinking about it. You don't get a chance to make a gateway to a national park from scratch. And so, they're working with state, local governments, and private landowners and nonprofits to make this kind of thoughtful, even to the point where they know that a lot of the people coming from the east side are going to come from Kanab.
Yeah.
So they're going to set up an electric shuttle system to be able to get them into the park, out of their car, long before they're near the park. So,
yeah, and it's like what I see is this ongoing challenge in Utah is you've got the environmental community who want preservation, and they put that on the highest pedestal, and I get it, absolutely. You don't want to come back and see everything covered in asphalt and homes and whatnot. But then you also have these people who so want to just live this rural lifestyle, who are getting really choked out. And the town that I've looked at a lot, and it looks like you have too, is Helper, Utah. Like it for a long time has been these old, codgers who were mining back in the day. They love the old town. They love it. They want to preserve the mining community and the mining economy. And they don't want to see it turn into Moab. They want a real economy, not a tourism economy. And you get that same sense when you get out of Moab and go down to San Juan County, and you have like the old ranchers, and they just want to graze the land. They want to be able to make a living on the land. But then they're battling against the environmentalists who want to preserve the land. Do you find that you can find a happy medium, or are those two groups always going to be at odds?
It's going to be growing pains on both sides. At some point, the problem, and this is me on a soapbox, I'll tell you right now, the problem that I see in like society in general is that everything seems to be black and white.
Yeah.
It's like, this is how I think, and this is what it is, right? Whereas there's got to be give and take, and it doesn't seem that there's much appetite for give and take anymore. It's just, I want it my way.
Yeah. Oh, you want cattle? Oh, you must be a Trumpist and a Trump supporter.
Yeah, well,
and MAGA.
there is people that run cattle in various parts of this state who I know as friends and are great stewards of the land, and they understand
I know them too. Yeah.
They understand that if we just tear it all up, then we're tearing up our future. We want to leave this to our kids. By the same token, there are plenty of bad actors that don't see it that way. Or, I've had this BLM permit 4 generations now. I don't even look at it as being public land anymore. I look at it as being my land, Ammon Bundy and that crowd, and so there's got to be a little bit. I mean, it's historically part of the landscape, the cattle industry, but then again, it comes back to water, comes back to land, it comes back to sometimes, you think about what is the highest, best use of this resource.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Well, and that is totally subjective, depending on your socioeconomic status. 'Cause
right.
If you're a rancher and you see an empty field and a stream running through, you're thinking, oh my gosh, I could put 50 head of cattle right there. And then if you're a conservationist, you just think, man, that should just stay exactly the way it is right there and not change at all ever. And it's just one of these battles where you're not finding the give and take at all. It's kind of sad, because I got to know some of these even the river guides, and they never want to talk about what they really want to say on the record, because they're really afraid that they're going to be labeled as right wingers, because they think that maybe Bears Ears shouldn't have gotten quite so big. And they're losing some permits that they had in those areas where they were able to earn more of a living for their family. And then I hear about a ranching family who's been into San Juan and they've lost, 1,000 acres. They can't graze anymore. And it's like I see this guy, Yvon Chouinard, owner of Columbia or Patagonia.
Patagonia.
Yeah, he owns a ton of land up there in Castle Valley. He owns Castle Rock. And he just decided he's going to donate that all of that land. It's hundreds of thousands, or it's probably thousands of acres to conservation easement. And I think that's awesome. But he is so anti-rancher, and he's so letting people make a living on the land, and it's just kind of sad. You can't see somebody who can see both sides of it.
Right. Well, you think about the life of a river guide is can be a very nomadic kind of experience, and that's maybe by choice, but does it have to be that way? Probably not. And I've seen river guides make real good by getting lucky, So,
yeah.
I know a river guide who got told about how to harvest brine shrimp out on the Great Salt Lake and got out there before the permitting system, and then he was one of the first people to, an early person to get a permit. And then when he sold his company, he retired comfortably. But that's because he had an interest in boats. Mm-hmm. He liked, being a Grand Canyon river guide, and then, this is something that I can do with boats in the winter. Right?
Yeah.
But again, that's just comes down to luck.
Now, we've tried for years to do a story on the brine shrimpers on the Great Salt Lake, and those guys do not want to give you access. Have you ever been able to get to know those guys? I mean, obviously this guy.
I know some of the old school guys.
Ron Johnson, is that his name? I think he still has a huge company. It's still a big operation.
There are a few people, and I'm not going to go into that right now because I'm actually working on a brine shrimp story.
Oh, okay.
And so I don't want to sour any relationship that I'm trying to forge. But they are. Let's just say that it's kind of secretive because there's some proprietary information that especially the brine shrimp co-op wants to protect.
Yeah.
And that is also to the point now where you can't get a permit anymore, right? The way that it's regulated is there are 21 companies that harvest out on the Great Salt Lake, and I think 20 of them are in a co-op. So they all work together to process.
That's cool.
There's a lot of science that goes into it, It's not just sea monkeys.
The guys who started Epic Brewing Company sold their operation to Cargill, and they did something like I know they were in brine shrimp, something related to that.
Yeah, if you go, you can go do the research. I'm not going to say the names. If you go and look up who has the permits to harvest brine shrimp out on the lake, there's some names that you will recognize.
Yeah.
Families from Utah that, let's just put it this way, there's names that you'll recognize.
Okay.
And so we can talk about this a little bit off camera.
Yeah. It's something that's been
pretty
fascinating
cool
for years because one of our best longtime writers is like, Rich, I want to do a story, a brine shrimp captain. I was like, dude, absolutely, make it happen.
Right.
And he worked on it for like 5-6 months. They don't want to talk. They don't want to say anything.
No.
They're a secretive bunch.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where it's a lucrative market. It's kind of a closed market, and I'm just really interested in just the life cycle of the brine shrimp.
Yeah, and what's happening as the lake level's dropping? Are the brine shrimp surviving? Can you talk about that?
I am going to find that out on Monday.
Nice.
So I work also on a series called This is Utah, where we kind of highlight like cool, interesting things, people.
They advertise in Utah Stories magazine.
Oh yeah. Yep. So pick it up on your local newsstand.
Yeah.
Don't forget to send your donation to PBS Utah too. I got to give that
subscribe
pitch,
to the magazine
right?
and send your donation.
Yeah, let's cover our bases. So yeah, I'm working with the DWR to go out and talk a bit about that industry, and I'll have more to follow. So
that's great.
We're doing a whole half an hour show on different aspects of the lake.
Yeah, there's some interesting industry out there. The one I didn't know about till I just drove was they age hardwood logs, and I guess the special conditions that are out there, the salty environment, can make logs have a really particular characteristics that are really valuable.
Yeah, that company that's an interesting story. Trestlewood.
Yeah, that's right.
Right. So the loosened trestle that was built in 1903, replaced by the causeway in I think 1958 or 59, and the subsequent issues that with the salinization of the north arm of the lake and the south arm of the lake, and the difference between not having to exchange. Anyway, we'll go back to the Trestlewood. They've been at it for about 30 years now. They got the rights, the salvage rights to the loosened trestle.
Okay, that's how it all started.
So they turned that into like interesting toned wood like that, and cut some of the bigger pieces into beams, and it's all 1903. That's all old growth timber. You're never going to see it like that in your lifetime, right? So they ended up doing that. I think they sold all of it. I think it was a ridiculous amount of board feet, like 90 million board feet or something crazy. Wow. Set up a mill and sold that, and now, like you say, they actually will. I'm pretty sure what they're doing is that they take new lumber and age it out there, and let the wind and the rain and the salt and all that stuff, give it that interesting gray weathered look that is very desirable.
Yeah, it's really cool because
hardly not affordable.
Yeah, and to shift gears a little bit, so we did a little story on the Great Salt Lake. Obviously, it's gotten tons of attention. The Wall Street Journal did a video. My brother told me I got to watch, and then I think the New York Times, and then ABC News. Everybody's coming out here because this could be some giant ecological disaster if the lake actually dries up. And if we head on the trajectory we're on, it's just like a matter of years. There's just not much we can do about it, short of a massive infrastructure project to bring water in, maybe from the ocean. Have you looked at that? Do you know? Is there any other than everybody not watering their lawns anymore or doing a project like that? Is there any other viable solution?
There's some viable solutions. The fact that like water in the West and Utah, a thumbnail sketch is the first oldest right has the first right to use it, right? So the oldest right has the first right.
Okay.
But you have to prove up your ability to use the water. You can't just have the water right, but not use the water. So use it or lose it. So then that contributes to the fact that if I want to keep this valuable commodity that is a water right, I have to use that water for whatever, and a lot of it goes to agriculture.
85%,
right? And so there needs to be, and I think the last legislative session they worked on this, which was really interesting to see kind of the legislature is taking this seriously.
Yeah.
They're realizing
that surplus, that $2 billion surplus, like
we're going to
70% of it went to water.
This is gonna be something that we really need to work on. So maybe some of the diversions that have happened and kept the water from going out to the Great Salt Lake, maybe some of those diversions will be, opened up. The Bear Lake pipeline probably is a dead issue, but we don't know. And again, it's funny that we're sitting here talking because in my 30 years of doing documentaries at the PBS Utah, I've touched on all kinds of stories, so I can pretty much yammer on about, any issue if you
Yeah,
want to
pretty
go,
cool.
you know. So
Yeah.
that's kind of one of the lucky ends of my my job. I mean, that's why I love it and keep doing it. I
Yeah,
just
it
like
sounds
research and I'm curious and I enjoy that kind of a thing. So the cool thing too is you meet people that you wouldn't have ever, you know, I have no business being in the same room with, you know, any from the woman who was the secretary of the director of Fort Douglas, who ended up being a neighbor of mine and becoming a good friend before she passed, and you know, all the folks up at Alta who I interviewed for the Alta experience. You know, some of those folks, you know, unfortunately, you know, everyone a little older, a lot of them have passed, but it's lucky to be able to tell these stories and kind of learn about, you know, this my adopted home, which is now, you know, you always consider yourself an East Coaster if that's where you're from. But I've lived here longer than I lived on the East Coast as part of the percentage of my life, so I guess I'm from here now. So
Yeah, it's pretty cool. It's pretty cool what you've done. I mean, it's great to have that institution. That's just because when I started my like foray into filmmaking before I started the magazine, I was attracted to talking to these old people because their perspective on things was so unique. And one of the coolest interviews I did was like Sam Weller before he died with his wife, and to just sit down with people who saw downtown Salt Lake City like in the 40s and the 50s and 60s and this evolution of the city, and they'd been on Main Street most of that time, just to hear what they had to say about it, you know, before they passed, and to see that history through their eyes. It's a pretty awesome experience to have that.
yeah, I mean,
But how do you get this TikTok generation into history?
well, you know, I think it's about content, right?
Yeah.
You have to come up with something that people will find interesting, but then you think about it too, that maybe the tolerance for a long form is not what it is, and maybe if we want to tell a long form story, we just kind of trot it out in 1 minute, 2 minute bites.
Yeah.
Till we have enough to make a half an hour, right?
Yeah.
And see if
It's
you
funny
know,
because you got that appetite for really short stuff, and I guess you're appealing to the kids who have the attention span of the gnat. But then you also have these long form podcasts that are doing really well. It's amazing. Like Joe Rogan will talk to, Jordan Peterson for 3 hours, and they can, and some percentage of the population can glom onto that and listen to the whole thing. But I think it's like how many young people are building the attention span to watch a Ken Burns documentary?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I need to, you know, I have a consultant that lives in my house. He's 15 years old.
As do we.
I need to pick his brain a little bit more and just say, you know, what do you think's going to stick?
Mm-hmm.
You know, if I'm going to throw something up against the wall, let's see what sticks, right?
Yeah.
And so, or maybe you think about, like, when I was growing up, like, oh, we really wanted these Frank Zappa records, and they were all out of print. You couldn't get them. And really, we just wanted to hear the music. We didn't care about owning the pristine copy. We just wanted to hear the music.
Mm-hmm.
The kids live in this world right now where you can just go on and type up, you know, Blind Melon Jefferson from 1920, a most obscure 78 record you would have never found or had access to in your lifetime, and there it is, you know, or whatever band or group, you know, from back then to who's making music now, you know.
Yeah.
But then again, it's like you wonder if somehow with social media that, you know, maybe the fix is in, right?
Mm-hmm.
The thing that gets shown to you, somehow somebody's getting paid, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how do you, you know, as the PBS model of we're looking for people to watch our stuff and then buy in on it and send us money because what we're doing is something that they want to support.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so is there some algorithm that sends you this TikTok dance, or and I will
got to do more elephants spurting paint out of their
elephants,
painting with their feet.
And the woman that came up with that idea was like 22. So there you go.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a crazy world. I watch my kids in front of the iPad, and it's like crack. I mean, they just want it. After I say, okay, 15 minutes is up. Okay, what do I got to do to get it again? And they got to earn their iPad time. And it's like you just cannot convince them, riding a bike is more fun than that.
Yeah.
Or playing soccer or whatever. It's so addictive and so hard to get their attention away from screens. And if it's good, it's, programming and good screens, but they just love the garbage. I mean, anything with little dolls and playing with dolls and whatever. And my little girl.
Yeah, my son is amazing, the breadth of his interests. Like, he'll come up and show me something, and it's like, all right, dude, why is that funny? And then he'll show me something that, like, it'll be a Vox documentary about, Sinclair Lewis and the meatpacking industry, right?
Really? Wow.
And so it's a whole range. It's a range of stuff, and it's kind of all out there. And how do you filter and how do you cut through the noise? That's the $1 million question. If we can figure that out, well, you're on your way to the $1 million, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, cool. Well, thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it. Joe, I wanted to ask you how you've been able to keep your job so long, and how you manage this environment of public television. But I guess it's just telling great stories, and they see the value in what you're doing.
Yeah, and it's what the interesting thing too is that it's like I finish a project and I'm like, man, that was challenging and time consuming, and when do I get to start again on another idea, right? So that's kind of how it all ends up going. And I'm lucky. I'm very lucky. I mean,
Do you generate your own ideas?
I generate ideas. Some are brought to us.
Mm-hmm.
Some, I did this documentary. Well, I don't know. It was kind of like a how-to thing about preparing for disaster. And that was right about the time of Hurricane Katrina.
Wow. And
what was interesting on that one is that, or Hurricane Sandy, excuse me, the one that hit New York.
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm.
So at that point in time, again, being thrifty and making every dollar stretch at PBS Utah, I realized that all these different Army units were going and doing disaster relief, and all of them, had a high-definition video camera along, and they put it out for all to see and download and use for free because it was a government, it was on the government's dime.
Ah, cool.
DVids. And I got really compelling flooding, wind, all kinds of crazy footage that I couldn't afford to send out. But again, in this modern world that we live in, I basically downloaded it online, and with a few phone calls and releases, I had what I needed.
Cool. Well, we'll use our last 5 minutes to a couple more questions online. What do we got, Troy?
All right, so a few things. Candace wanted to know if we can link the page for Joe, so we'll do that in the description for the YouTube once we post this video after it's live. So there's that. Aaron also says that it's good to see that the magazine is going live. So thanks for watching. And then someone named Kate mentioned that Joe has made a ton of films for KUED and Utah PBS. She also said, unfortunately, I couldn't afford to keep working there, but I loved what I got to do for 15 years.
Kate Cook.
That's my cousin.
We love you, Kate.
Yeah.
Good to hear from you.
She says,
Kate's
thanks
awesome.
for this important conversation. So.
Yeah, I can't wait till Kate comes and works for me on this show.
She knows her stuff.
Yeah, she's awesome. Yeah, well, thank you, everybody, for watching. Thanks, Joe, for coming on. I appreciate it.
It was a blast. Thanks for reaching out. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm glad you could do it. And if you want to support Utah Stories, again, this is our current issue. We got our new October issue coming out in just a few days. It's really cool what we've got going. So the magazine is all about where to go, what to see, what to do, adventure, all fun stuff. But then online, we're covering more important stuff. We're covering the housing and homeless issue. We don't want to make the magazine political, and we've been getting some crazy comments as we've shared these conversations online. I can't share a lot of those comments because a lot of people are accusing us of being right wing or left wing, and we really try to maintain this neutral position. But I mean, just calling out the good old boys club in Utah, and I say, you know who you are, the NIMBYs who are preventing affordable housing. I don't think that's real political. That's people on the left and the right who just don't want anything in their backyard that could jeopardize their property values. That's kind of the nature of the comments we've been getting. But I appreciate the comments, nevertheless. I mean, call us out. I love getting negative criticism when it's constructive. If you're just going to do an ad hominem attack on me, that's a little bit less constructive. But I appreciate everybody who's subscribed to our YouTube channel, and your comments, your questions, and thumbs upping the video. That also helps. And our free digital newsletter that's available at utahstories.com. It's absolutely free. We send you one single email every single week, and you'll get the voice of local Utah delivered right to your inbox. So with that, thank you everybody who has subscribed to the magazine. I forgot to say that last week and the week before. I really appreciate all the subscriptions coming in, because that is helping us out immensely with distribution as gas prices have gone up. The labor shortage has really made it difficult to get it out, and your subscribing to the magazine really is what keeps us going. So with that, thank you very much, and I'll see you next time.